An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 91, Battle of Last Hearth. Clouds embroiled in a tumultuous gale above. Daenerys, nonetheless, had never seen such a calm in the air since arriving north for the third time in her life. Jon's childhood kingdom, freed for but a moment of the on and off blizzards that had descended upon it 100-fold since the Great Fall. Before her stretched out a glorious white snowfall, beautiful even in darkness. In normal times, Dany imagined she and Jon taking a sleigh ride through the Wolfswood around Winterfell, likely much similar to the lands of the Umbers, huddled together and enjoying the serenity of winter, before relaxing by a hot spring and making love atop the snow. But the chill remained. Daenerys walked close to Jon, boots crunching on the fine snowflakes capping the tall hilltop, overlooking the river valley before them. Wrapping her wool-covered arms around Jon's waist, shearing the heat of dragon blood to ward off the cold. A message from whatever gods above to ward off her dream. A dream for another time, another life. This one. The cold only brought death. The snow only bringing demons. Looking up at her husband, Jon merely stared ahead, at the sprinkle of torches below them. "If you're cold," he said flatly, voice devoid of the usual warmth and joy that he normally shared with her, "you should stay with the dragons." Warmth and joy were hard to come by in these times. "I'd rather stay with you, my love," she offered, leaning up to kiss his cheek, matted with the prickly stubble of his beard. Behind them, the 6 great beasts waited for their parents to command them. Unnaturally subdued, even they sensing the malevolent air about the north. In her arms, Jon seemed to release some of his tension. Eyes turned to look at her, as grey as the clouds above them. Wordlessly, he brought their lips in a sweet kiss. "This may be our last moments together." "Let them be happy," she begged the gods above. Breaking their kiss, Jon kept his arm around Daenerys, not keen to let her slip away from him. "Not now. Not ever." Together, they gazed upon the battlefield before them, waiting atop the northernmost crags of the lonely hills, where they waited with their dragons for the right moment. Aside from the eerie Dragonstone, or perhaps Greywater Watch, Last Hearth was clearly one of the best defensive positions in all of Westeros. Nestled on an island in the middle of the last river, harsh mountain precipitation keeping the waters fast and flowing, enough to break apart any surface ice that froze up atop the river. The north bank was quite muddy and steep, the only easy access being through a series of bridges that bisected the island, a pair serving the King's Road, and 3 pair erected as alternatives. At the eastern end laid Last Hearth itself, filled to the brim with small ballistae and long-range crossbowmen to provide constant supporting fire for the men below, along with another surprise courtesy of Cersei Lannister and Aerys Targaryen. "We'll hold them off," Jon told Daenerys. He didn't know if it was for her sake or his own. "We will kill that monster." Daenerys held the certainty that her husband lacked. Her doubts existed in the means, not the end. Their plan was simple, conceived in the Imperial office aboard their ship from King's Landing to White Harbour. Defense in depth. Make them pay for every inch of ground in bodies and flesh. Defense in depth, relying on statistic defences and obstacles both of the north and the river, and on the island itself. 2 lines of soldiers, their more mobile forces in front, and the heavy battalions of Unsullied and Westerlands behind to continue to blunt their momentum. Take down as many of the monsters as possible, then withdraw as fast as possible. Back to Winterfell, where the mass of cavalry and less mobile infantry units waited for the final showdown. "Perhaps we should have brought the whole entire army here," Are Dothraki and the mounted knights? Our cavalry can't fight in such a cramped island. The only hope for a quick victory is to defeat the Night King. Both Emperor and Empress were determined to make that happen. Jon sighed, ice cooling the heated blood of the dragon within him. Eyes fell upon the large cloud of ice and snow, blooming on the horizon. He is coming to us. Daenerys shivered. Coming for me? He tightened his grip on her waist. I will die before he takes you. I know. Light the flames, boys! Gendry barked at his bannermen. When the morons come, we're gonna need to see further than our fucking faces! Flickering torches poked out of the snow every several yards, joined by giant bonfires that banished away the endless darkness. Many were huddled close to them, braving the wrath of their lords and officers to find one last feeling of warmth before the battle, and their potential deaths were upon them. Hand automatically drifting to the sheathed needle, drawing security from it clipped to her side. You sound like a true lord, idiot. Smirking at her insulting lilt, the look in her eyes as she gazed upon her stag was anything but insulting. Looking up at him, as if he was everything to her, which he was. Taken by a sudden urge, she reached out to grab his hand. I'll be by your side, Gendry. For all of it. The dark blue of his eyes, the Baratheon eyes, were filled with love. And I will too. He hefted his mighty warhammer, armoured as a true Stormlord. Ready, Harry? Her loving eyes morphed into the dark ones of the girl that killed Joffrey. That butchered the phrase. The cold bit Arya's skin. Swirling cloud of ice and snow, stinging the summer child's lungs, but filling her with terrible resolve. Valar Morghulis. She smirked again. But what do we say to the god of death? Gendry looked to the north, as the swirling snow cloud continued to envelop all before it. Not today. Breathing deeply, Jaime Lannister watched as the oncoming blizzard enveloped the northern bank, and then the river, and then the first line of men. Fuck the cold, Lyell Craighall muttered. The rock knew chill, of winter squalls and gusts of wind from the Iron Islands lashing upon the cliffs. But not like this. Never like this, plunging them into a deluge of cold to their very core. High Carden was each of the 7 elves, but at least it was warmer than this. Shut up, Jaime responded with a hiss. The gold of his hand burnt the skin of his stump as it absorbed the cold, and he only clutched at his blade harder, blistering his palm. Uncle, I can't see anything. Tommen was fundamentally a sweet boy, one unsuited for war. Jaime would rather his son be in Casterly Rock, rebuilding their family's reputation and bringing prosperity back to the Westerlands, after his grandfather's mistakes and his father's bottomless ambition. Not here. No one deserved to be here. That's the point, Jaime replied cryptically. They want you scared, Tommen. He wants you scared. The Knight of the Realm pointed to the widow's wail. But he won't get you as long as I stand here. Behind him, the trebuchets were consumed in a flurry of activity. Oridius! Screamed the commander in Valyrian, torchbearers setting the massive projectiles draped in pitch and tar on fire. More were readied by the Giscari artillerymen behind, this volley only meant to illuminate the vast wasteland of the northern bank. Bright light into the darkness of the screaming blizzard. Nambemadus! The trebuchets clunked, ropes whipping in the air as the flaming projectiles sailed forward, aimed for pitch-soaked patches of the fields cleared of snow. Seconds ticked by as they met their mark, firelight suddenly banishing away the darkness, exposing the sheer mass of the army of the dead, charging towards the army waiting for them. 7 hells! Arya breathed, gazing upon what her husband had told her during the nights in King's Landing. What the High Command spoke of that graced the Dragon Pit during the infamous parley with Joffrey. 7 fucking hells! She believed Jon. Believed Dany. Believed Robb and her husband. But it was only when glimpsing it before her eyes that she truly understood. The entire horde before them, in their tens, hundreds of thousands, charging at them. At her! Such feelings predominated across the Imperial army. Robert Glover paled. Edric Dane was consumed in a frantic prayer. Tommen Lannister trembled. The strong bore, loyal Crakehall beside him, close to pissing himself. Even the iron grey worm of the Unsullied flinched, gaping at the dead charging. Eyes glowing an evil blue. From the highest lord to the lowliest Essosi levy, they stood in terror once the army of the dead exposed themselves for all to see. Lips set in pure hatred, and anger as furious as the words of his house, as the fires of his forge, as the storms that gave his lordship his name. Gendry grabbed a shield bearing the stag of House Baratheon. Warhammer in the other hand, strength holding it up high. He slammed the shaft against the shield, over and over again, as rhythmic as the deathly howling of the whites was demonic. Smack, smack, smack. It was picked up by the other Stormlanders, slamming their swords and axes against their shield in a show of defiance, to make the Night King shudder from their lack of fear. Smack! 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 One by one, it was picked up by the other lords, the other houses, the other battalions of bannermen. One by one, until the entire army slammed their weapons together. A roar that boomed across the battlefield. Booming as the dead closed the gap, icy blue trained directly at the forces of the living with the thoughtlessness madness. A thoughtless bloodlust on behalf of their masters. Of their master. Smack! 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 And in an instant, the howling shuddered as the van slammed into the static defences of north of the river. It was as if their lines rippled, many within the Imperial army across the flowing waters, cheering at the sight. Bodies and bits of bodies flew every which way, impaled on spikes, both nestled within the deep trenches or lined up diagonally to drive straight into the heart of the normal-sized man. Taut wires placed at the neck of levels sheared off heads that ran into them at top speed, while whole fields of razor-sharp metal shards strewn about did the same for feet. Countless whites found themselves victims of the defences, only for the tens of thousands behind to charge ever forward. Haunting blue of their eyes trained on the living resting atop their island on the middle bank. Knock! Came the command of dozens of lords and officers, followed by the sound of thousands of bowstrings meeting their arrows. Loose! A sheet of black erased the smoky grey clouds above, interspersed with a few flickers of orange-red flame of the incendiary arrows. They ascended into the heavens, seeming ready to duel with the gods above, before plummeting down onto the struggling force of death itself. Dragonglass arrowheads pierced the rotting flesh and mouldy bone of the whites, even a single contact felling them instantly. Blue orbs snuffed out into a serene nothingness from 3 or 4 arrow shafts slamming through. A few incendiary arrows hit the pitch-lined trenches, setting them aflame and extinguishing the life, or rather, undeath, of the hundreds of writhing monsters within. Ballistae and trebuchets disgorging flaming projectiles, ploughing through the dozens as they hit the ground. Leading from the front, one White Walker tossed an ice spear seemingly blind through the chaos, but it hit home, as an entire ballista was torn apart into kindling, showering dozens of men around with shards of sharp wood. But a dragonglass arrow hit its mark, piercing the walker's left shoulder and detonating him into mere specks of ice, felling further hundreds of corpses all around him. Hope surged among the Imperial army. Perhaps they would hold. Perhaps they could beat them here. only for the remaining walkers, all the turned sons of Craster, and he had many sons, to extinguish all such hope. Far as can be from the front, shield bearers surrounding them, they raised their arms almost in unison. Looks of exultation turned to horror among the living as the water of the last Hearth River began to freeze. Liquid turned to sputtering ice, cracking and hardening under the harsh glare of the ancient magic the Night King had bequeathed to his generals. A grim realization set upon the Imperial army. Face hardening and steeling themselves for the coming fight. "Make ready!" Sir Mackenzie shouted. "Present!" Over 10,000 hand cannons are lowered at the order, steel barrels glinting in the firelight, banishing the darkness around them. Loaded with dragon glass, wicks smoking as fingers tapped the triggers gently. Ice leaving its sheath, the legends of a blade said to be one of the first great swords wielded in Westeros calmed Robb. His northerners waited with their Lord Paramount before destroyed bridge in the front, slowly reforming out of ice. Perhaps it saw action in the first long night. Perhaps he should have asked Bran and Winterfell, or Jon. No time to do it now. But if it had, then the Grey Sword would cut down the White Walkers once more. "Winter is here for the White Walkers!" he screamed into the night. The children of winter screamed it back into the chilly air. "We are the Fury!" The normally quiet Gendry screamed into the night, the guttural cry joined by his Stormlanders. Beside him, Arya drew needle and cat's paw, the wolf amongst stags fighting for her new home thousands of miles to the south. "Unbound and unbroken!" shrieked Tyene Martell, daggers out as the men and women of Dawn hissed their snake chants. Bronn, drawing his sword, spat and let out a curse. "All this for a fucking castle!" A shiny beach in Essos could have been his future had he told Jaime to fuck off after Tyrion fled Meereen. "Hell's with it! Anyone who runs shall have my sword up their ass!" That only drew more snake hisses from the Dornish bannermen. For the dozens of clans of free folk, far from their homes and treasured liberty in the true north, they gazed upon the icy blue eyes of the demons that so desecrated the lands they loved. "Fuck the fuckers! Fuck their ice! Moron leaders! 4 months!" Snarled obscenities left Tormund and the other wildlings itching for payback. Just as the ice hardened fully, the first white charging across, a single sound left the throat of the Imperial army. A sound that shook the entire landscape, echoing louder than the snarls of the dead. The sound of a wolf howl. Howl! Line break. Whatever calm was left on the island was shattered in a cloud of black powder. Muzzle flashes of the hand cannons all along the line, discharging their deadly payload. Behind, dozens of cannons fired, solid projectiles replaced with a special concoction created by Gendry and the Imperial Smiths, each releasing a sheet of dragonglass shards over the heads of men and into the horde, smoke mixing with the swirling snow to blind those only a mere feet in front of them. Hundreds collapsed motionless in the snow. Hundreds broke apart into mere chunks of tattered flesh and shattered bones. Hundreds simply disappearing as the wall of dragonglass shredded them into nothingness. But thousands charged on, oblivious to their comrades' demise, sheer instinct and control driving them ever forward. Utterly expendable, the shells of men, women, and children whose souls had long departed into the afterlife, snarling an inhuman battle cry as they charged into the waves of humanity standing against them. And it was chaos. Sharpened stave shuddered the horde, but there were so many. Too many. Mere moments passed before all coherence of the Imperial line disappeared into a maelstrom of hacking axes and sweeping blades. Men not braced were thrown back by half a dozen yards. Men far unluckier, torn apart by the rusted weapons and haggard limbs. Whites used everything at hand, grabbing men from their brothers and hauling them into the clusters of death as ants would prey, their teeth if necessary, and the living digging their heels and refusing to budge. There was no skill required, no art in this melee. The whites attempting by sheer weight of numbers to overwhelm the men before them, and the living faced with such a frenzy only needed to stab, swing or chop in order to secure a kill. And yet charge broken any number of times. Stopped by water or felled by arrows. Burned by fire, braving the sheer wall of firepower, the swarm threatened to consume all in front. But acts of great bravery, mixed in the middle of the blood and death and smoke, held the line. Beric Dondarrion, blade alight as he fended off a trio of ice spiders threatening to consume him alive. Edric Dane of Starfall, running 3 whites in with his sword, the infamous Dawn, before he parried a former night watchman one-handed with the other. Sandor Clegane, grabbing a wildling white by the feet whose furs were covered with the long-dried blood of the Hardhome massacre. While it still snarled and writhed, the hound used him as a club to sweep away over a dozen that tried to surprise the screaming Arya, cat's paw burying in the eyes of a skeleton. The free folk were buckling, undisciplined masses hacking and stabbing their way through the enemies that started to exhaust at the endless charge of the oncoming horde. "Come on!" Tormund's dragonglass caved in the head of a walking skeleton, its bone knife stabbing into his shoulder with a spurt of blood. He snarled in pain, snarled turning into a roar of defiance as a flurry of arrows rained upon their foe, fire power rescuing the wildling host. The hand cannoneers, guided by the steady hand of Sir Mackenzie, fired their second volley of point-blank range, at this point having tried to miss. "Knock!" Every archer of the Westerlands drew back their longbows, ready to assist their battered comrades of Dawn and the North as they switched to fire at will. Flat fire. Jaime Lannister did not waste time for any dramatic pauses. "Loose!" Black flock of arrows, falling onto the swarm like a vicious downpour. Whatever rear guards were present leapt into the fray, filling the gaps of the fallen. House Manderly's light infantry, House Selmy's armoured men-at-arms, the shock troops of House Glover, their elderly lord disemboweling a white about to rip open the neck of the she-bear Lyanna Mormont, before the corpse of a wildling spearwife ran him through with her own spear. Survivors of Castle Black, flaming swords of the fiery hand, and black cloaks of the Night's Watch, charging to rescue the desperate free folk. The line surged in confidence, throwing themselves once more into their renewed frenzy. Losing his axes in a hairy carapace of an ice spider, Tormund found himself tossed like a rag doll. The giant form of Athen, eyes glowing an icy blue, advanced upon him, only to evaporate as a cannon fired at point-blank range. "I fucking hate Thens!" A black cloak suddenly erupted into view. "Get up, wildling! We have a war to win!" Edison Tollart bared a mouth filled with rotting teeth and a wide grin before he added his sword to the melee. "For Gren!" "Fucking crows," mumbled Tormund, ignoring the aches and bleeding that marred his already battered body. He grabbed a battered dragonglass sword from a fallen comrade and charged. "Forwards!" Valyrian steel sliced through rotting flesh and bone as if it was kindling. Malevolence extinguishing from their skulls upon first contact with the magic-infused blades. Robb looked around, spared a moment of contemplation as the fresh detachment of House Dustin plugged up the hole that he had been holding. It transported him back to the God's Eye, an army on the verge of breaking apart. Only instead of rockets and deception, it was just the sheer weight of the swarm. "Sound the retreat!" Robb shouted into the din, for the hornblower, a young boy green around the gills, sword having tasted flesh for the first time. "Sound it!" The hornblower brought the horn to his lips, before at least half a dozen whites swarmed him. Rusted swords, blood-curdling screams from the boy. Gutting open by the monsters, a ragged volley of arrows felled the 3, while ice took the others for trophy before they even moved from their kill. Cursing his luck, blood of the poor soul of the north mixing with the already caked red brick of the blood of countless other northern comrades. Rob grabbed the horn out of the dead boy's hand and brought it to his own lips, sounding the retreat with every bit of power in his heaving lungs. Mournful and sombre, as if the cacophony of a funeral of a great man beloved by the people had been encapsulated into one sound. As one horn of the northerners was caught by those from the Stormlands, other horns picked up by the dozen among the Dornish, sounds piercing the frenzied thirst for vengeance in the free folk, the lines threatening to break. Only 10 minutes of fighting had savaged the living to their very core. Everything going for them, dashed upon the rocks by the mindless monsters that had just poured upon them. Men of the southern reaches of Westeros, hell, even the free folk, were stretched to their limits, nearly collapsing in a mad dash for the rear, for safety. But it was the lords that saved the plan. "With me!" bellowed the Lord of Storm's End, warhammer swinging wide as the dragonglass coating it swept away half a dozen wights in one blow. The young wolf, taking a blow upon the head from a wight, stood resolute as he protected the retreat with ice. Bronn and Tyene, Lord and Lady of Dawn, the former letting the wights slam against his shield only for the latter to stab forth with her blades, then backing off for her husband to hack at the remains. To see such highborn, their leaders, at the front lines fighting with them, it drove the men's spirits, keeping them going against impossible odds. Fire! In a single instant, a yellow-white sheet of flame left the barrels of 10,000 hand cannons, and 100 cannon. The dragonglass projectiles scything white after white, one bullet even felling a White Walker in a shower of ice. Few met their mark, but thinned the horde in front for the singularity needed. Behind, but it was too late to stop what was coming. Retreat! Another blow of the horn, and the entire front line fell back, racing in organised clumps towards the secondary line, scrambling across the walkways spanning the secondary trench. Knock! Jaime watched as his archers drew bowstrings on another volley of dragonglass arrows. Yet another volley filled the night sky, giving cover to the withdrawing forces across the safety of the trench. Why aren't we using fire? Tommen asked, hands sweaty as it gripped the sword on his belt. The trench contains pitch and tar. We can't hit it before this time is right, or we trap our forces. Fitting. His entire life. Hell's all of Westeros was a close-run thing for the last few years. Quite fitting. Cannons. Cannon out of action. Being moved first line, enveloping on the front line, raced those from the rear, advancing to the head to continue to hack and stab away at the enemy. Lords stayed in the fray. All screamed orders, guiding their men out. Robb Stark was in a frenzy, not even hearing Lyanna Mormont scream for him to withdraw. He stabbed an ice spider through the mandibles with ice, using the thick carapace as an impromptu shield, as he drew a dwarf cannon from his belt and fired at a wight. Another wight was on him, stabbing through his side before ice swung around and decapitated him. The lord staggered but continued to slash at the onrushing dead, until two Bear Island bruisers grabbed him from the straps of his gorget and dragged him back. Before I continue with the rest of this chapter, I'm sorry I can't shout anymore. Someone has asked me to be a bit more quiet with my recording. Here we go. Blade burying to the hilt, piercing the padded leather of a knight's watch armour, Tyene kicked the lifeless wight into the trench below. Move! Her raven hair matted with the blood of countless Dornishmen, she, Bronn, and her personal guard formed a semicircle as the last of her levies raced over the trench towards safety. Whatever safety could be provided. The shattering snap of a dwarf cannon rang in her ear as the dragonglass bullet smacked into the head of a long-dead wildling. Men, with me! The semicircle contracted inwards as her guards were the last to pass across. Finally, it was her and Bronn. He held a torch in hand. Behind him, only feet separating his flesh and the claw-like hands of the dead. Go! He yelled, literally pushing her while racing behind, fingers digging into his flesh and threatening to drag him to his death. Screaming a war cry, a monster digging his teeth into his shoulder, Bronn slammed the hilt of his sword into the skull and threw the torch into the trench. Yellow-white arcs visible for miles. Daenerys was chafing from her perch as the rockets detonated and the second trench erupted in flame. Cold, forgotten as the safety provided her as a dragon rider and empress, filled her soul with guilt and rage. "We need to move now!" she shouted, dragon awakening. "You know the plan," John replied, the icy steel of his wolf blood in his voice. "Wait till the second rocket barrage." "They are dying down there, John! My men! Our men!" His heart was heavy, every movement below feeling like Gendry's warhammer slamming into his chest plate. "It isn't fair for me to live while they suffer. To be like Joffrey, watching those of lesser blood die while he remained safe and comfortable. There is no comfort in what you will do, in what you may have to do. If we don't follow the plan, Danny, those men will die for nothing." Fists clenching, Daenerys was forced to nod, agreeing with her husband, the man that had won every battle he had ever fought. Gazing down, she prayed that her family would be safe, that Grey Worm, Podrick and Jaime Lannister would the snarling corpses back. The fires roared in the trenches only 50 yards from the tightly packed ranks of the secondary line. The massive orange-red conflagration started to fade, to falter. Errant wights trying to charge across the remnants of wood and wicker planks, no longer being summarily imitated. Walker commanders ordering their obedient drones to charge into the flames so as to smother them. Sheer desperation, but this army did not break, did not fear, only forward into the jaws of steel itself. Cold seeping through the black leathers and felt lining, Grey Worm watched as the last of the Dornish, Sir Bronn bringing up the rear with blood soaking his gauntlet and a worn smile directed at him, raced through the gaps in his lines to bring up the rear. "Hen, Kiri!" The Unsullied all closed ranks on his command, tight as a maiden. All of the Astapori training coming to the forefront for Grey Worm. He barely knew of a time when he wasn't unsullied, serving the forces of the Masters under their whips, serving the great Daenerys and Jon Targaryen under his own accord. But it felt as if his life had been preparing him for this, staring at the great horde of death charging at him, mindlessly falling into the flaming trenches to their deaths solely under orders, their own all-powerful masters behind them smothering out the flames to make up for a full charge. He knew why he had been brought to freedom, brought to the Targaryens, to know Missandei of Nath, and to fight for all living. For Missandei, I will return. It filled him with resolve. "Dovagedi!" Grey Worm shouted at the top of his lungs, his Unsullied holding the place of honour in the centre of the main road through the centre of the island. "Somebody us!" Shields clashed together. "Illegality! Injahagagas!" The line of dragonglass tipped spears lowered in a tight bristle. "Who holds the north?" shouted Podrick, receiving a chorus of whoops from his hoplites. Dragonglass pikes joined that of the Unsullied in an impenetrable mass poking through the spiked defences, directly in front of the shield wall. Defences that extended all along the second line. "Who holds the north?" The whoops rocked the very air, joined by the other northern fighters directly behind them. The roar of flames were now being drowned out by a very different roar. Tens of thousands of undead throats open in a pulsating shriek that would terrify even the most hardened of warriors. Jaime Lannister did not break. "See those, you morons!" He held Widow's wail high, mailed finger pointing to the onrushing horde. "They think they can stop us, but they fucking won't! We are men of the Westerlands! We are lions! We are boars! We are spears and fir trees and the fucking sun itself! When we roar, the very rocks tremble! So let the fucking dead in the seven hells themselves hear us roar!" Thousands of very living throats bellowed, as if every lion in the world had come to fight that day. Drawing his sword, Tommen couldn't stop trembling. Lyle Craighall stood right alongside him. "Listen to me, young lord. Just keep hacking away. Fierce and powerful." He could make out the individual faces of the charging dead. Ready, man? The strong boar asked. He grinned as wide as his handlebar moustache as the dread drew closer. Not so fierce! All was visible. The shimmer in the lines as the reformed horde crashed into them. Rippling flames of the powerful weapons added to the sheer maelstrom of death and carnage tearing apart the once idyllic northern island. Breathing deeply, Daenerys took Jon's hand in hers, violet eyes searching, pleading, yet also knowing. Now? The Greys she adored, that she knew better than she even knew herself, were all that were needed to give her the answer she sought. Aye, now. Jon pulled her to him, hand burning hot on her waist and tongue sneaking into her mouth one last time. I love you. She cupped his cheek, trailing a thumb in one last intimate moment before they charged into the fray. I love you. Without another sound, the Emperor and Empress broke apart, boots gliding on the snow till they reached their respective Rhaegal and Balerion. Both dragons lowered, letting their father and mother mount them without incident, brother and sisters behind them bobbing their heads in respect and obedience. It was time. The howling wind atop the lonely hills warbling, almost as if the gods sighed at their promised ones. So be gone! With a combined roar, 6 sets of wings unfurled as they dove from the cliff. They are here, I know it. The other as well. Are they men crossing the river to the castle? Yes, Great One, I saw them off myself. Great One, if we wish to win here, let me commit the rest. No, we are here for her. Only her. Something reminiscent to pain, to anguish, registered. Where was she? Where could she be? Line break. It was as if the thunderclaps of thousands of storms had made manifest when the wights of the army of the dead slammed into the seamless shield wall. The wave was so powerful that the corpses impaled on the spikes of the staves served as a ramp for the others to climb over, bidded ever forward by the silent screams of their icy masters. Exerting a control over them that would have made Joffrey and the great masters quake in envy. Spears skewered hundreds, but they still came forward. Each line fought them differently, each house their own fighting style. The Westerlanders let the dead come at them, slam on their shields, short swords and spears stabbing out in powerful thrusts, running through the midsections of corpses right in front of them until the next one slammed into them, some shields even sporting spikes on their shields. The northern hoplites pushed back, whooping and chanting rhythmically as they fought stubbornly to hold the dominant position. Pike bearers stabbing forward at the dead and men-at-arms hacking at those that made it to the shields with the bastard swords and axes. The Unsullied took it, giving ground to trip up the assaults before stabbing with their spears. Thrusts with almost swords-like skill and bashing aside the weak skeletons and rotted corpses with their shields. It was like nothing ever seen. The best the living had to offer, from the dusty deserts of Astapor, the rolling hills of the Westerlands, and the snow-capped beauty of the north. Fighting together, having mercy on the long fallen by sending their flesh to the bowels of the earth where they belonged. Fighting together, all for the same monarchs, the same land, the same cause. The cause of the living. But it wasn't enough. Slowly, surely, the dead began to make their mark. A boy from Lannisport, caught outside the shield wall, unswarmed. A grizzled hoplite from Wintertown, feeling the life drain out of him as a jagged bone spear poked through the gap in the shields and ran through his gut. A slave-born man, stolen from his mother by a master, seeking good coin to fight in the Unsullied, pulled by his spear away and from his comrades and into the jaws and blades of the whites. Such played out hundreds of times over, faster than they could bring in replacements, faster than they could contract their line, slowly exposing their flanks to attack. Until a miracle. Out of nowhere, Out of the swirling darkness above, 6 jets of flame bathed the island in heat not seen since the doom of Valyria, eviscerating the whites till their flesh immolated into sizzling vapour and bones to smoking black ash carpeting the ground, churned to mud from the sheer weight of the marching enemies. 6 dragons dove into view, leaving the safety of the clouds and blizzard snowfall to the cheers of the battered Imperial army. Emperor and Empress atop the largest 2. Finally in the fight, ready to turn the tide and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Watching from a distance, shrouded in darkness's embrace, the monster that had once been Marden Stark smiled, if the almost imperceptible curling of his lips could be called a smile. While his generals watched the 6 jets of flame incinerate a large portion of the forward third of his army with a look of horror, Marden Stark could only feel triumph. And so they show themselves. Should we engage them, Great One? No. I shall deal with them myself. Valthrax growled underneath him, the great dragon of his brother freed of breathing, of the mere trivialities of life, only remaining to serve him and his thirst for vengeance. You bring the scum to the position. Yes, Great One. You will not beat them! Xylus fought against his restraints. He will kill her before you get me to do your bidding! But the Night King only cocked his head, sensing a presence he had not felt since that day long before, when he killed the great 3-eyed raven. A presence that filled his icy heart with a zealous confidence. You will, Xylus. You will perform your greatest magic for me tonight. So begone. And with the command, massive wings kicked up a cloud of snow as the undead beast leapt into the air. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Sorry if I have to be more quiet now. With the amount of battles that we are doing as things start to close, or at least lead to the climax for the close, I will have to be more quiet than previous battles. I'm sorry, but I can't keep yelling like that. The people I'm living with, it's not fair on them, okay? Anyway, oh boy. What's the Night King got up his sleeve now? You guys know what to do. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!